Data clearly presents.
Whoa.
What exactly is a gene?
Hang on.
Each one of our cells contains 46 strands of DNA.
I've got too many things happening here. Okay. Recording. Okay. Yeah, that's all right. Okay. Here we go.
Imagine that you want to build a robot.
No.
You don't know exactly how to do it, but
That's the wrong video. There we
Stated
go, that's
clearly
better.
presents. What exactly is a gene? Each one of our cells contains 46 strands of DNA.
How many strands of DNA? 46. Where did 23 of them come from? One side of what? From one side of your family. 23 of them came from your mom. 23 of them came from your dad. Okay, and they're in matched sets. So gene number 1 from mom and gene number 1 from dad will contain genes for the same characteristics. So if gene number 1 contains the hair color gene, then you'll have a gene for hair color from mom over here and a gene for hair color from dad over on the corresponding place on the same chromosome from dad. Okay?
A single strand is made of millions of particles called nucleotides, and these nucleotides come in 4 different types, which scientists have labeled A, C, T, and G. A gene is a special stretch of DNA.
A gene is a what? A special stretch of DNA. Okay, so it's just one little segment of the DNA.
A sequence of A's, C's, T's, and G's that code for something.
Does anyone remember what a gene codes for? It gives you the recipe essentially for one particular protein. So a gene is basically a recipe for a protein, one specific protein.
A gene contains information for a cell to read and use, but what exactly does that information do? You might have heard that there's a blue-eyed gene, a freckle gene, possibly even an anger gene, but single genes don't literally make things like eyeballs or freckles or temper tantrums. Genes make proteins. Those proteins then interact with each other and all sorts of chemicals inside the body to build things like eye pigments, freckles, and mood-altering hormones. A single strand of DNA contains thousands of genes or unique protein recipes. Humans have roughly 20,000 altogether. Some genes are small, only about 300 letters long. Others are well over 1 million. The length and sequence of a gene determine the size and shape of the protein it builds.
What size gene do you think makes a small protein? A small gene. What kind of gene makes a large protein? A really long gene. Yeah.
The size and shape of the protein determine the function that protein will have inside the body. Hemoglobin, for example, is a protein structure found in red blood cells.
Okay, this has a nice little animation that shows what happens with hemoglobin. So make sure that you are watching for this. Do you guys know where hemoglobin is found? In the red blood cells. What is the job of your red blood cells? To carry oxygen. They carry oxygen from your lungs to your tissues, and when it gets to the tissues, it should release the oxygen. Okay? So in the lungs, it should grab the oxygen, and in the tissues, like your fingers or your heart or your muscles, it should release the oxygen so your body can use it to burn your fuel.
Its unique shape and size allow it to capture oxygen molecules when blood flows near the lungs, and then release them later when blood flows near oxygen-starved tissues. Pepsin is a digestive protein. Its unique shape allows it to break down food inside your stomach so it can be absorbed by the body. Keratin is a structural protein. Its unique shape and size allow it to link together with other keratin proteins to form hard structures like fingernails, claws, and beaks. Different creatures have different genes, which is ultimately why their bodies look and function differently. But one of the many reasons scientists believe all life on Earth is related is that the basic DNA code, the language of A's, C's, T's, and G's, is pretty much the same for all living things. Many creatures even share some of the same genes. You might not be too surprised to learn that humans.
Can you guess what percentage of our DNA we share with a chimpanzee?
I'd say 97. 78. 97.
Okay, I hear a 97, I hear a 78. Anyone else got a guess? 46?
No, 46. It is not 46.
77? Okay, we got some guesses.
It is actually
78? Okay, let's find out.
And chimps, which are closely related, share 96% of their genetic code. But what would you think a lowly fruit fly has in common with a beautiful swimsuit model?
Any guesses on this one?
67. 67.
I'm not 100% sure of this one because I watched another video, a different video, and they said that humans and bananas share 75% of the same DNA. Because guess what? A banana, and I don't know if that's true because this one actually says only 50% with the fruit fly. And if that's true, then there's no way that we share 75% of our DNA with a banana. However, if you think a banana has to build a cell, yes? We have to build cells, right?
But then,
A banana has to divide cells. So all the little proteins that are involved in cell division, we have to have all those same proteins involved in cell division. The cell, a banana cell, needs to burn sugar and use oxygen to, pardon me?
Does it not like cell walls?
It has cell walls. So there are all kinds of things that are different between us and the banana. But it is shocking how much of the actual cell structure and function are the same between us and a banana, right? And even at that, half.
Surprisingly, about half of its genes.
Which is 50%.
Because all creatures use DNA in pretty much the same way, genetic engineers have found that if they take a gene from, say, a bacteria cell and insert it into the DNA of an animal or a plant cell, that animal or plant cell will then read the new gene and produce the bacterial protein. Engineers have mixed and matched the genes of different organisms to produce many new creatures, including corn that is toxic to insects but supposedly safe for human consumption, tomatoes that last up to twice as long in the grocery store before going bad, and a new form of bacteria that produce the human protein insulin, which we then collect from these bacteria.
Do you guys know what we use insulin for? What is insulin? It's used for diabetes. Normally, your body produces its own insulin and your cells respond to it. And what it does is it allows your cells to absorb sugar from the blood. And your cells need that sugar inside so that they can burn that sugar and do all the jobs, use that energy to do all the jobs your body needs to do. If you don't have enough insulin, you're not getting that signal that says, let the sugar in. So you might need extra insulin. There's another form of diabetes where you're getting enough insulin, but your cells have been overexposed to insulin over the years. Perhaps you've eaten lots and lots and lots and lots of sugar, lots of refined carbohydrates, and your body is it's built up a tolerance to insulin, essentially. And this gets worse if you are older, if you are overweight, if you're eating lots of sugar. Those are three things that can contribute to the second form of diabetes, which just means your body is making insulin, but your cells aren't really responding to it very well. They need more and more to do the same job. So it's like the insulin is knocking on the door of the cell saying, hey, hey, let in the glucose. And your cell is like, what? What? You said what? Right? And you need more insulin knocking on the door saying, please let in the glucose.
Bacteria and give to people with diabetes who need extra insulin to survive. So just to sum things up a bit, what exactly is a gene? A gene is a special stretch of DNA, not the entire strand of DNA, just a segment that codes for something. Each gene is like a unique recipe, which usually tells a cell how to make a protein or a group of proteins. Different creatures have different genes, but all genes are written in the same basic DNA language of A's, C's, T's, and G's. I'm John Perry, and that's genes stated clearly.
Okay, so we're going to go back to the beginning, page 41, and we're going to go through, make sure you've got all your vocab words and everything filled in that you need to have filled in. Page 41. Each one of our cells contains how many strands of DNA? 46. Do you think you need to know that number? Yes, you do. So we'll put that down as a vocab word. 46 strands of DNA. You get 23 from mom. And you get 23. Okay, something is wrong with this pen. 23 from dad. Extra chromosomes. Okay, so there's this whole process called cell division, which in a perfect year we would also study in grade 9, but we're not going to have time because we've only got like 5 days left. When your cell gets ready to divide, it basically makes the chromosomes line up along the center of the cell. Now, when the body gets ready to make either an egg cell or a sperm cell, they actually line up in pairs. Okay, so chromosome 1 will be with chromosome 1. Chromosome 2 will be beside chromosome 2. Now, it might be like a mom chromosome and a dad chromosome, one you got from your mom, one you got from your dad. It might be a dad chromosome and a mom chromosome for the next one. It's very random which one goes where, which is why you end up with so many different possible combinations. But at any rate, the cell splits, so you end up with these two new cells that only have one copy of chromosome 1, one copy of chromosome 2, one copy of chromosome 3, okay? Then they actually undergo a second division. You actually have copies of those and they split apart. We're just going to skip that part, okay? So you end up with these cells that have one copy of each chromosome. Some of them are from mom, some of them are from dad, the other one here. Now, when the cell is splitting apart, what can happen is that instead of, like, the chromosomes are supposed to go like this, half go to one side and half go to the other side. Now, sometimes they get stuck together, and instead of one going this way, both of them go this way. So you can end up with two of the same one over here, and then this one is missing a chromosome, right? So the egg or the sperm will have too many of chromosome number 6, say, and this one won't have enough of chromosome number 6. So that's what that kind of genetic disorder is from, yeah? And that's why as women get older and as men get older, the whole cell division process, like everything else in our body, starts to fall apart a little bit, right? We get wrinkles, our skin is not as, bounced back as it used to be, all these things. Well, the division of the cell also has more problems. So you will end up with more genetic disorders because although a woman has all the eggs she's going to have before she's born, like the baby, like in the fetus that makes all the eggs, the final division process doesn't happen until the egg is released. So as you get older, those division errors become more likely. So that's why when you're an older mom, like say over 35, they will do more genetic testing on you than say if you were a younger mom at say like 25 or whatever. It's embarrassing. They actually call pregnancies over 35, they call them geriatric pregnancies. Geriatric meaning like, if you look at the field of geriatrics is the study of old people. So basically, if you're a woman and you're over 35 and you're pregnant, you are having a geriatric pregnancy because your body, that fertility part is actually fairly old at that point. Yeah. Anyway, fairly fascinating. A single strand of DNA is made of millions of particles called nucleotides. Is nucleotides a vocab word? Yes, we have already highlighted that, but we're going to do it again here just in case you missed it somewhere else. And what are the 4 types of nucleotides? A, C, T, and G. A, C, T, and G. And these are nucleotides. And by the way, if you guys ever have any questions just about how cells divide or how genetics work or anything like that, if you want me to go off on a tangent, I am happy to go off on a tangent because I actually think there's a lot of relevant stuff you could learn without it actually being like directly in the curriculum. So feel free to ask if you're just curious about things, okay? So a gene is a special stretch of DNA. Now, if you don't like the word stretch of DNA, you could say it is a segment of DNA that codes for something. Is gene a vocab word? Yes. A gene is a special stretch of DNA. It's a segment of the DNA and it codes for something. What does it code for? It codes for a protein. A gene contains the information for the cell to read, but what exactly does that information do? Well, you might have heard that there's a blue-eye gene, a freckle gene, possibly even an anger gene. And actually, this gets into something we're going to be looking at later. So there is eye color. I'm just going to introduce a new word here. Eye color is a trait. And trait is going to be a vocab word. We're going to come across it later today. Eye color is an example of a trait. Whether you have freckles or not is an example of a trait. Actually, what I'd like you to do right now is I would like you to hold up your thumb and see if it bends backwards or if it stays straight. See if you can bend your thumb backwards. Thumb bendiness is a trait. If there's a single gene that either says you can bend your thumb backwards or you can't. So thumb bendiness is a trait. It's not a particularly good name for a trait, but it's a trait. Now, have you guys heard of dominant genes and recessive genes? Okay. The gene that codes for letting your thumb bend backwards, that is a dominant gene. The gene that codes for your thumb being straight up and down is a recessive gene. What that means is my thumb bends backwards. So somewhere, either from my mom or from my dad, I got one copy of the bendy backwards thumb gene. Okay? Maybe I have 2 copies of the bendy backwards thumb gene, but it doesn't matter. If I get even one copy of the gene, my thumb will bend backwards. That's what it means to be a dominant trait. It means even if I have a copy of the straight thumb gene, my thumb's going to bend because I have one copy of the bend backwards trait. If your thumb does not bend backwards, what it means is you for sure have 2 straight thumb genes. You got a straight thumb gene from mom, you got a straight thumb gene from dad. Because if you had even one of the bendy thumb gene, your thumb would bend backwards. So if your thumb will not bend backwards, you have 2 recessive copies of the gene. One recessive copy from mom, one recessive copy from dad. So you know for sure what your genetics are related to that one trait. If your thumb bends, you could have one bendy and one straight, or you could have 2 bendy, and you just don't know, right? You just don't know what your actual genetics are unless you send in your DNA for testing. However, single genes don't, yes? That is a really good question, because there are all sorts of different genes for certain things, like hair color for one thing. There's all sorts of different varieties. There are different possibilities. There's things called codominance, where both of them will express, and you'll sort of get a mixture of the 2. So like, let's say that you had, and I hate to use eye color because eye color is actually many different genes that interact together. But let's just pretend with eye color that you got a blue eye from your mom and a green eye from your dad. You'll end up with sort of bluey green eyes. You know what I mean? Yes.
What about people who have 2 different eye colors?
2 different eye colors. Now, there is a certain thing. It's called chimerism. I'm just going to spell this. You don't need to know it. Chimerism. And what it means is that you have one section of your body that has different genetics than the other section of your body. Oh, and why does this happen? To be honest with you, right this moment, I don't remember exactly why. I'm going to give you my best guess, and then I'll go look it up over the weekend, and I'll let you know on Monday, okay? My best guess is at this point is that there were perhaps, when the egg was, sometimes 2 eggs get fertilized at once, and then they sort of join together, and then you'll end up with some of it developing just a little bit. So when you're still a ball of cells, one little bit of that ball of cells will have one set of genetics, and the other set will have a different set of genetics. So that could be how that comes about. For example, my husband, on his arms, he has normal amount of hair on his arms, okay? They look normal, it's all good. He has this one patch, it's about 2 inches big, only on one arm, and it is hairy like a gorilla. And I'm like, what is that? Why is that there? How did that come to be? So it's probably chimerism. He probably has like a hairy arm gene on that particular little section, right? And that's because of the cells just dividing differently and stuff. Yeah? All right. Single genes, usually it's really complicated. Genes, it's usually more than one gene that controls things. The thumb bendiness is one where it is just a single gene. There's also a tasting gene. There's this special paper with a chemical on it, and you can either taste it or you can't. And on Monday, I'm going to find that paper, and you get to taste and see if you can taste it or not. It's like, it tastes bitter. Bitter. So like coffee, what else tastes bitter?
Dark chocolate.
Dark chocolate tastes a little bit bitter, yes? Nothing. It just means you can, it just means you have a gene that allows you to taste that chemical. Some people love the flavor of cilantro. And for some people, cilantro tastes like soap. Right? Also a trait. So if you think cilantro tastes like soap, that's because you have one version of a gene. And people who think cilantro tastes yummy maybe have a different version of that gene. So that's another one. So it's just genetics. So don't let people tell you you're a picky eater if you don't want to eat cilantro because it tastes like soap. It's because it tastes like soap to you. And nobody really wants to eat soap. Okay, genes. What do genes make? Genes make proteins. Proteins, when they interact with each other, and all sorts of other chemicals inside the body to build things like eye color, or actually eye pigments, rather. Pigments. Eye pigments, freckles, and mood altering hormones. Is hormones a vocab word?
Yes.
Yes. Pigments, I don't think I'm going to make pigments one, but it's a good word, right? Pigments are just color chemicals, colored chemicals that make things certain colors. Tell your partner if you remember what hormones are for. What is the job of a hormone?
Send messages to the brain.
They are chemical messengers that travel through the body. Did you say he has 6 fingers?
Yeah,
That's cool. That's awesome. My son has pinky fingers that bend inwards. And he's also on the autism spectrum. And apparently, those two are somewhat linked. It is more likely to have a bendy inward pinky finger if you're on the autism spectrum than if you're not. Not that that means that if your finger bends that you are on the autism spectrum. That's not what that means. It just means that if you have autism, you are more likely to have the bendy finger than if you don't have autism. Okay. A single strand of DNA contains thousands of genes. Thousands of genes, or what do we call them? Protein building recipes. Humans have roughly 20,000. Do you need to remember 20,000? No. That's a specific number. I'm not going to get too wound about it. Genes all together. Some genes are small, only about 300 letters long. Others are well over 1 million letters long. The length and sequence of a gene determine the size and the shape. Or shape and size, it doesn't matter. Size and shape and size doesn't matter. Order doesn't matter of the protein it builds. The size and shape. What do the size and shape of the protein determine? The function of that protein. Ugh. This concept here, that the size and shape of the protein determine the function of the protein, that is it's not a vocab word, it's just like a concept, right? It's a cheat sheet concept. Not everything is a word, some things are diagrams, some things are concepts. That is an important concept.
What do you mean? What? Like our No, it doesn't.
Okay, hemoglobin is a protein structure found where? In the red blood cells. Its unique shape and size, or size and shape, allow it to, you can either say capture or grab. I'm going to say grab because it's a nice, easy word. Grab oxygen molecules when blood flows near the lungs, because that's where all your oxygen is. It's coming into your lungs. So here come the oxygen molecules. Once they go in, do you notice how the molecule actually changes shape? It literally is grabbing those oxygen molecules and holding on to them. Okay? That has to do with the fact that the blood near your lungs is somewhat acidic. And when this protein is in the presence of an acid, it grabs oxygen. It makes this movement. Is that true? No, it tends to be more basic near the lungs. You guys don't really care, but it's more basic near the lungs. It's more neutral near the lungs. That's when it grabs oxygen. When it gets to the cells, it becomes more acidic. And when it becomes more acidic, it releases the oxygen. So like hydrogens are jumping on and off that molecule and causing it to change shape, which is pretty cool. This is why I did my degree in biochemistry, because I'm like, this is the coolest stuff ever. There's like an acid and it changes shape. Why does it do that? And then it lets it go when it's in base. Whoa. Anyway. So then it releases them, the oxygen molecules, later when the blood flows near the oxygen-starved tissues. You do not need to know details about hemoglobin. You just need to know that it's an example. You just need to know an example of a protein, right? Pepsin. Pepsin, again, you don't need to know the word pepsin, but you need to know that there are digestive proteins. Its unique shape allows it to break down the food inside your stomach so it can be absorbed by the body. Does anyone know what type of protein pepsin is? There's a special word for it. It is an enzyme. Now, I'd like you to remind your partner, if you can, what an enzyme is. What's that? Creatine. Creatine is, I think it's an amino acid. I believe creatine is an amino acid. Or a small, like a small group of amino acids. I could be wrong. But amino acids are part of the protein. Yes. Now there are benefits to drinking creatine.
I think my research on this stuff is
It's
actually
supposed to help with recovery after cirrhosis. And there's so I think there are some reasons that you need to be careful about this. I don't remember what they are.
Well, I'm actually gonna get like
Yeah.
sleep.
Because
My lord.
Yeah.
when you're
Okay, absolutely. Or your eyes.
Yeah. 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 Yes. All right, so an enzyme is a biological what? Biological catalyst. Now, that's all well and good, but if you don't know what a catalyst is, that definition is useless, right? So what is a catalyst? Another vocab word. It speeds up a chemical reaction. I love science. It's so cool. Of course, that's how I ended up being a science teacher. If I didn't think science was cool, this would be a terrible job for me. Keratin. Keratin is another protein. Do you know what type of protein it is? Structural. And you should know the term structural protein. By the way, if I ever move pages too fast, if you ever want me to go back, just let me know. What does it mean for a protein to be structural? Don't think too hard about this one. It really isn't difficult. Yes. Yes, I absolutely can. There? Okay, are we good? Cool. What does it mean to be a structural protein? Yeah. Yeah, it basically forms the structure of whatever it is that's being built. Yes? It provides structure. And support. For example, what are your muscles mostly made of? Protein. What is your hair made of? Protein. What are your nails made of? Protein. Yes, so there's all kinds of tissues in the body that are mostly made of protein. So it's what makes them up. So if I say, what is the structure of your house? Your house might be made of wood and drywall and things like that. Okay, that's the structure. That's what the proteins are doing in this case. They're providing the structure. Its unique size and shape allow it to link together with other keratin proteins. So what you end up with is this network kind of structure that can be very hard, and so it's very protective. Or if you're a cat, you've got little claws and you can, like, you know, climb trees and things. If you're a bird, you've got a beak. You can crack open nuts and whatever it is that birds do. You can tell I'm not a bird person particularly. Different creatures have different genes, which is why their bodies look and function differently. But why do scientists think that all life on Earth is related? Yes. We are all based upon DNA. Every bacteria has DNA, every fruit fly, every banana, every person, every dolphin, every sea sponge, every amoeba. We all have DNA. We're all based in the same biochemical structures. Okay. And how much DNA do we share with a chimpanzee? 96%. Whoa. What percent do we share with fruit fly? 50%. I don't know what the deal is with the swimsuit model, but whatever. Surprisingly, about half of the genes are in common with the fruit fly. No, you do not need to know that we share that much. It's just kind of like to give you an idea of like how much we all share in common. Now, because all creatures use DNA in pretty much the same way, genetic engineers have found that they can take a gene from, say, a bacteria cell, and they can insert it into the DNA. So they'll cut out this little snippet of the bacteria, and then they'll get some cells, and they'll insert it into the nucleus of, say, a plant or an animal cell. And then, if everything goes according to plan, that animal or plant cell will actually read that gene and produce the bacterial protein. They make it sound so easy. I spent 8 months working in Montreal at the National Research Council, the Biotechnology Research Institute, trying to get a gene from one bacteria into a different species of bacteria and trying to get it to turn that gene on and make that gene go. The gene, there's a bacteria called Pseudomonas bacteria, and it produces a substance, it produces a protein that digests a very toxic chemical. And sometimes this toxic chemical is in the land, like people have dumped it, okay? They're called PCBs, bad stuff, polychlorinated biphenyls. But if you put these Pseudomonas bacteria in the ground, they produce this protein that chomps up the PCBs and makes them into non-toxic, smaller chemicals. This is good, yes? Except the problem is this Pseudomonas bacteria is very picky about its environment. It's kind of hard to get it to grow really well. It really needs a specific temperature. If it gets too hot or too cold, it's like, I'm just going to die. Okay? If it gets too acidic or too basic, I'm just going to die. So what we really wanted to do is we wanted to get that gene for that toxin-destroying protein from this little wimpy little bacteria into a more robust bacteria that could survive bigger temperature differences or bigger pH differences. And so we actually did manage to transfer the gene from here into here, right? We did some DNA sequencing so we could see, oh, the gene, there it is, I can see it. But then we tried to get it to produce that protein, and getting it to turn on that gene. During the 8 months I was there, we never got that to happen. I don't know if it happened after I left the job, but that was somebody, like it was a co-op job I did while I was in university. So hopefully, fingers crossed, somebody did manage to get it to turn that gene on later. But science can be a long and arduous process. They make it sound so easy here. Take that bacterial gene, stuff it in a plant, bam, the plant is making bacteria protein. It would be a much more long and involved process than that. Now, engineers have mixed and matched genes from many different organisms to produce many new creatures or plants. These are called genetically modified organisms. Has anyone heard of genetically modified organisms? Yeah? Including a corn that is toxic to insects. Why would we want a corn that is toxic to insects? Yeah. So insects don't eat the corn. We have 9 billion plus people on this planet, and we need to feed them all. What? Aren't we at 9 billion? Are we at 8? Oh, I thought we would hit 9. How many people on Earth? 2021. I don't want 2021. How many people is on Earth 2023? Oh, only 8 billion. I'm sorry, only 8 billion. Oh, they don't know that exactly. If you were to do significant figures on this, you could not have this like 9. Do you know what I mean? Like you absolutely could not, because people are being born and dying every second, right? So you can never know within that degree of certainty. Anyway. Okay, so we're at 8 billion, which is still a freaking lot of people, okay? And we need to feed everybody. And so we don't want the insects eating our food crops if we can avoid it. Now, the problem is that hopefully this thing that is toxic to insects is not also toxic to us, right? Now, an insect is very small. It's possible that it is toxic to us, but not in the quantities that we would eat compared with our body mass, right? So you want to make sure that the people in the regulatory bodies, like, you know, the Federal Drug Administration in the US, we have similar regulations in Canada. You want to make sure that the people in those places are doing good regulations and they're not being funded by the companies who are making these genetically modified organisms. Yes? Because the companies are just out for the profit. Yes? Oh, we want to save the world. We want to feed the world, et cetera, et cetera. And maybe there are probably people in that company who are like about, yes, let's save the world. But so many people get into money, 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 money. We must pay the stockholders. We must pay the CEOs. Like, I could make $1 billion, or I could make $1.5 billion. Doesn't 1.5 billion sound better than 1 billion? Right? So I'm hoping that you guys will all go out and be ethical, lovely human beings who are doing good for the planet rather than doing good for your pocketbook only. Hopefully you can do both, you know, right? It would be really good if you could go out and, you know, do something good for the planet and make money at it. So, you know, that'd be great. Anywho, hopefully our testing organizations are doing a good job of that. Anyway, and if you don't think our testing organizations are doing a good enough job, you might want to look at what's going on in Europe, because they are much more cautious about these things than they are in Canada and the US. So if you're like, I think I don't want to eat this, you can go and look at the European things and see if the Europeans think it's good or not, because they do tend to be more cautious. And if you want to be more cautious, you might look at their regulations. Honestly, I don't know. I just eat food because I can't be bothered to look up all the things, right? Like, I'm like, I don't know. If I don't live to be 100, I am okay with that. Like, if I live to be 80 instead of 100, that does not bother me, right? Like, I feel like I will be old and kind of decrepit at that point, judging from, you know, how my grandparents and my parents have done. However, you know, if I did really, really, really want to live to be 100, I would probably be looking into eating more organic foods that don't have chemicals on them. And I would definitely, Canada's much better in terms of like the hormones that go into beef and milk and things like that. But you can also get hormone-free, you know, meats and milks and things like that. So it just depends on your budget, because all those things are more expensive. Right? So it might be like, I would love to eat organic food all the time. It's in my grocery store. It's no harder to get. On the other hand, when you're paying so much money for the groceries you have already, and you're like, I cannot afford to buy the organic ones, then maybe you're like, well, I don't need to live to be 100. Maybe I'll live to be 95 instead, right? Tomatoes. Have you ever noticed that the tomatoes from the grocery store last forever? Right? They're in your fridge. A week later, they're still in your fridge and they're still like perfectly good, right? However, people tell me, and I don't know because I don't really like tomatoes, sour, mushy hell fruit that they are. People tell me that they love a tomato fresh from the garden. My mother-in-law will like take a tomato fresh from the garden and eat it like an apple. And I just think that's disgusting because I do not like tomatoes. But people who like tomatoes are like, they're so much more flavorful if you get the real tomatoes that aren't these genetically modified ones that last forever. I kind of like the genetically modified ones that last forever because they don't taste as strong. But that's because I'm weird about tomatoes. So normal tomato versus modified tomato. The normal tomato after a week maybe looks like this. The modified tomato looks like it did before. Yeah.
So like I saw on the internet,
Yeah.
there was a post about this guy finding like a 30-year-old cheeseburger from McDonald's. He opened it and it was like perfectly intact.
Yeah, it hadn't like decayed or anything. Yeah, that's kind of scary. Yeah. Take care what you put into your bodies. If you take nothing away from Science 9, like really chemical formulas, some of you are going to use that, some of you are not going to use that, whatever. But you should take care of what you put into your bodies. Put good things into your bodies. Don't put junk into your bodies. Your body will treat you nicer. Yeah? Because when you get to become 50, like some of us, like one of us, you sit there and you go, oh, I wish in my youth I had behaved better towards my body and treated it better because now it would be in better shape. So do be careful about what you put into your body and how you treat your body. It doesn't last forever. All right, a new form of bacteria we might get that produces the human hormone, insulin, which we collect from the bacteria and give to people with diabetes, who need extra insulin in order to survive. That's actually really nice because they used to have to get insulin from like horses or something like that. And that's a pain because you have to harvest it from the horse and blah, 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 blah. So now they can just grow bacteria. The bacteria will make the hormone and they can just collect it. And there's no ethical issues around that because I don't think anyone is worried about the rights of the bacteria or the feelings of bacteria. You know what I mean? So it's really good that they can do that. So genetically modifying things, sometimes it's one of those things where it's up for debate and you need to do some thinking about where you sit, in your own personal preferences. Summary: a gene is a special stretch of DNA, not the entire strand of DNA, just a segment that codes for something. What does it code for? A specific protein or a group of proteins. Different creatures all have different genes, but all genes are written in the same basic DNA language of A's, C's, T's, and G's. All right, with my other class, I started on RNA. Do we have it in us to do just a tiny bit of RNA? Just watch the video, not like write anything. Just watch it. We're just gonna watch the video a little bit, okay? We're gonna meet the amoeba sisters. So we're on page 49, but you don't need to write anything down if you don't want to.
Sometimes it feels like DNA gets all the credit. Yes, the structure of DNA is amazing. It has a beautiful double helix structure, a twisted ladder. It has its own emoji. DNA stores genetic information and codes for your traits. However, sometimes what gets left out is how important RNA is. Without RNA, you actually couldn't get that genetic message out to your cells so that they can start producing proteins. We talk about this in protein synthesis. RNA is a very
Where does DNA live? In the nucleus. Where does RNA exist?
From the nucleus and the nucleus and the nucleus. So
It starts out in the nucleus and then it moves out into the cytoplasm. So DNA only lives one place, but RNA lives both places.
important biomolecule, just as important as DNA. In fact, RNA is even hypothesized as coming first, before DNA, in the RNA world hypothesis, something we need to make a separate video about. So let's compare and contrast DNA with RNA. First, you will find DNA and RNA in all living organisms. In eukaryotic cells, DNA tends to be found in the nucleus, while
Do you guys remember what a eukaryotic cell is?
yeah,
A eukaryotic cell specifically has a nucleus in it. So plant and animal cells have nucleus. That's a eukaryote. A prokaryote does not have a nucleus. So that would be like bacteria. Bacteria don't have a nucleus.
you can find RNA both inside and outside of the nucleus. Prokaryotic cells don't have a nucleus. Both DNA and RNA are nucleic acids, which are a type of biomolecule. Nucleic acids have a monomer, which, if you remember from
What is the monomer of nucleic acids? Starts with an N. I want you to think, name one nucleic acid. You can do it. Especially if you know the name of DNA. What's the name of DNA? Deoxyribonucleic acid. Do you know what RNA is? It's ribonucleic acid. What is the monomer that makes up DNA? Yeah. It is a nucleotide. So the nucleotide is the smallest unit of DNA, but it is also the smallest unit of RNA. So both RNA and DNA are made from nucleotides, all strung together.
our biomolecules video, a monomer is a building block. The monomer for nucleic acids is a nucleotide, so both DNA and RNA have nucleotides.
Now, do you remember the three parts of the nucleotide? There's a phosphate, there's a sugar, and there is a base. Which one is the circle? Phosphate. Which one is the pentagon? Sugar, and the base is the rectangle.
The nucleotides of both RNA and DNA have three parts: a phosphate, sugar, and a base. Let's draw 6 nucleotides of DNA and 6 nucleotides of RNA. DNA is generally double-stranded, and if focusing on these 2 strands of nucleotides here, you can see they run anti-parallel to each other.
Is anti-parallel a vocab word or is it an enriched word? An enriched word. Does it mean to be anti-parallel? It means they're not both right side up. One is right side up and one is upside down.
RNA is generally single-stranded, so you are just seeing one strand here. The sugar in DNA is deoxyribose, and the sugar in RNA is ribose.
Now, you are going to be responsible for knowing that there are different sugars, but you don't need to call it deoxyribose. You can just call it D sugar. D sugar. You don't need to call it ribose. You can just call it R sugar. So what does DNA, what kind of sugar does DNA have? D sugar. What kind of sugar does RNA have?
Ribose.
R sugar. If you want to say ribose and deoxyribose, that's fine, but I'm just going to go for the R sugar and the D sugar. Which one has D sugar? DNA. Which one has R sugar? RNA. Okay, it's pretty easy to remember. D for D sugar, D for DNA. R for R sugar, R for RNA.
This makes sense because DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. That's helpful to know because the deoxyribose is a sugar. And nucleic acid is that type of biomolecule it is. RNA stands for ribonucleic acid, as its sugar is ribose. The bases in DNA are adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine.
Does anyone remember which one is different in RNA? We have A, T, C, and G in DNA. Which one is different in RNA? U. What does U take the place of? Which letter does it replace? T. They're actually right beside each other in the alphabet, so that's pretty easy to remember. T and U are right beside each other in the alphabet.
RNA stands for ribonucleic acid, as its sugar is ribose. The bases in DNA are adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine. It helps to remember the popular mnemonic apples in the tree, that helps you remember that A goes with T, and car in the garage, so C goes with G, to understand how DNA bases pair. The bases in RNA are adenine, uracil, guanine, and cytosine. Notice the different one? It's uracil. So you have to change that popular mnemonic device here. Instead of apples in the tree, maybe the apples are under.
Okay, so the apple has fallen from the tree and now the apple is under the tree.
Car in the garage still works though. We mentioned earlier that DNA codes for your traits, but it couldn't do that without RNA's help. In our protein synthesis video, we talk about 3 different types of RNA and their very important roles.
Okay, what are the 3 letters that we see here?
TR.
mRNA, tRNA, and rRNA. I want you to take a look at this picture and I want you to guess what that R stands for. Ribosome. rRNA stands for ribosomal RNA. And the nice thing about tRNA is that the shape almost looks like a T. It's called transfer RNA. Okay? And we're just going to leave it there for today. Your homework, page 48, which is really short. So most of your homework is to work on your cheat sheet. I swear if you leave your cheat sheet until next Wednesday and Thursday, you are going to cry. I don't want you to cry. Don't cry. Does anyone want their paper today? Who wants the big paper? I'll put the big paper down back here.
Smaller paper, we can have the size down.
I'm just making small paper. Showing you're small. Like quickly. Yeah, I know.
If you would like a smaller paper is bigger.
Guess
Okay, John, I gotta bring my instrument home.
Alex, guess what?
I gotta bring my instrument home.
Alex, guess what? Guess what? The small people.
Small pieces are just on the very side counter, like under the periodic table.
Okay, thank you. Bro, Alex. Oh God, Jay, can you get me one? Thank you.
You can get a couple sheets, right? Because it's to be the same size, you get 2. But if you know what, if you need more paper, I'm not going to get too wound up. I just don't want people bringing in a book. You know what I mean? Especially if you're a big writer, I'll give you more paper.
What?
The problem is you need to actually have something that you need to make the protein. Okay? So,
Literally, it's so long.
the DNA is so long, and yeah. And in DNA, in bacteria, the DNA actually is a circle rather than being like a straight line. So you have to have that DNA open up, without the molecules attached to that DNA and reach the DNA, which is quite a complicated process. It might cause analysis with having the DNA open up, making an RNA copy. It's less invasive. I would take them today if it's up because I'm I'm always. You can take it today. That's okay. Do you know what I mean?
Certain words, like
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so genetic code just refers to any sequence.
I really hard to
Fire.
when I'm that's where show this where's an author? It's right. Show I where's my phone?
Genetic code is just like whatever the order of the.
Is that do you have like talk about the whole or just the
It could be any part. So genetic code is in the order of the letters. You read them at a time. You can read one genetic code 3 letters at a time. So genetic code can be a paragraph.
Come on, Brian, stop. Actually, this is a fair match.
No. So it's just the language.
Left hand. Confused count.
So DNA is like this.
One. It's like long.
Yeah.
Oh, shit.
Section here. So it tells you how to make eye color.
It's like RNA that's not copies. It's just a small.
Yeah, it's just a smaller part of the DNA. So when we make a copy of RNA, we copy the gene. So it's
So the RNA is
like-
the gene?
The RNA is a copy of the gene, yes. So it's like the DNA molecule is a book that contains many recipes, okay? Each recipe is a gene, okay? And
So each 3 is a gene.
no, each 3 tells you which amino acid.
Is the protein
The protein is a protein copy of the gene. So like the gene is like the recipe.
is the gene the part of the DNA that's red?
Yes. So we will, if the gene is this, if the DNA is this long, okay, this little section here is a gene, this little section here is a different gene. Okay? So we make an RNA copy. That goes into the nucleus.
So wait, so not the whole thing is red? Oh wait.
Because we're gonna make an RNA copy of just this little sequence, because this is the only protein we wanted to make. Maybe this is an eye color protein. Maybe this is the bendy protein over here. All on the same string of DNA. Okay? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
Oh, good.
You too.
mRNA